This is episode number 116, featuring Pixar artist and plein air painter Bill Cohn.
This is the Plein Air Podcast with Rhoads, publisher and founder of Plein Air Magazine. In the Plein Air Podcast, we cover the world of outdoor painting. Called Plein Air, the French coined the term, which means open air or outdoors. The French pronounce it Plein Air. Others say Plein Air. No matter how you say it, there is a huge movement of artists around the world who are going outdoors to paint. And this show is about that movement. Now, here's your host, author, publisher, and painter, Rhoads.
Thank you, Jim Kipping, and welcome to the Plein Air Podcast. I'm Eric, and I'm glad you're here today. I think today's going to be fun because we're going to get a little peek inside of Pixar Studios, the world-famous animation studios, and how plein air painting has impacted Hollywood films. Pixar and a couple of other studios, as it turns out, has encouraged plein air painting by their digital artists in order to capture more of a feel of accurate light and effects in their animation and drawings and backgrounds. So this is going to be a good episode. I think you're going to learn a lot from it. We're also going to be doing a panel at the upcoming Plein Air Convention this April in San Francisco with Bill Cohn, also Sharon Callahan, both from Pixar, and with Mike Hernandez, also a plein air painter, but from DreamWorks. And they're going to talk about what you can learn from animation artists that applies to painting in general and plein air painting, and also what plein air painting has taught them to make their artwork better. So it's going to be something that's going to be give and take. You're going to both learn and take something away from it, and also they're going to tell you what they learned from you. It's going to be a great session, and I'm told there are lots of digital artists who are planning on attending the convention to learn more about plein air painting because, well, we're in San Francisco. A lot of them are out west, and so it's easy to come up from LA or from across the bay or wherever. So anyway, I think that's going to be fun. We'll have a lot more fun new people there. In case you're not aware, the Plein Air Convention is coming up in April in San Francisco, downtown San Francisco. We're going to be indoor sessions all day long. So if you're not a plein air artist, you can still come. We have all these great indoor sessions, 5 different stages and big screens, high definition, so you can see what's going on. And then we have a big expo hall. We do that pretty much all day, and then at the late afternoon, 4 o'clock or so, we all go out and paint at the same places together. This year we have an indoor arena for anybody who doesn't want to go out and deal with the city or parking or traffic or anything. We have an indoor arena. You'll have to book that in advance. We also this year are providing bus transportation to the painting locations, but you have to book that in advance too. We can't have everybody rush in at the last minute. You want to get that done now. If you're coming to the convention, make sure you get that reserved. There's going to be a small fee so that we can pay for our buses. But anyway, this is a way that you can get to those locations in case you don't want to take your car. So you can learn more about all that at pleinairconvention.com. Also, I want to remind everybody we're going to be rewarding the $15,000 grand prize in the cover of Plein Air Magazine at the Plein Air Salon giveaway on stage at the Plein Air Convention. Winning this award is the fastest way to gain notoriety in the art world. I kid you not. We have watched people who won this award, and then all of a sudden they got invited to every event. They got invited into lots of galleries. They became pretty well known because their picture is plastered all over all of our stuff, Plein Air Magazine, which is, of course, the number one selling art magazine in Barnes & Noble stores nationwide. So you're going to get a lot of publicity and a lot of notoriety, and it's a great way to boost your career. And surprisingly, most of the people who have won were never heard of, were not well-known artists before they won. So it's a great opportunity for you to get in. And of course, one of the little tricks is we have, I think, about 20 different categories, and some of the categories don't get a lot of entries because they're very specialized. And so if you enter something in a category that doesn't naturally get a lot of entries, if you win in any category, your painting is automatically put into the national judging for the national prize, which will be judged here soon. So this year, we're ending early. It's going to be like any day now. We're going to be ending because we have to get the judging done so that we can get it done for the Plein Air Convention and make sure that we get everything under control, get the big check printed out and all that stuff. So you can enter at PleinAirSalon.com. Remember, it's not all plein air painting. It's supposed to be rooted in plein air, but there's studio paintings, landscape paintings, figure paintings, still life paintings, all kinds of paintings you can enter. We like it to be rooted in plein air. In other words, the original study was done from life or from plein air, preferably. Okay, so you can learn more at PleinAirSalon.com. And after the interview, I'm going to be answering some art marketing questions from actually a marketing specialist who submitted them. So he's going to put me to task. We'll find out more about that. But first, let's get right to our interview with the amazing plein air artist and Pixar legend, Bill Cohn. Bill Cohn, welcome to the Plein Air Podcast.
Thanks, Eric. I'm glad to be here.
So, Bill, you have an interesting background, and so for the people who might not know or might not have met you yet, tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. I have an education as a commercial illustrator, which I started working at a newspaper as a staff artist around 1983. And I did that for close to 10 years, and then I did freelance work on the side and ended up working in animation, doing some layout and storyboard work for television commercials. And eventually, about 93, I started freelancing for Pixar Animation Studios. And I started on Toy Story doing sets and props and things like that. And I've been there ever since. So I've been there for 25 years.
So I'd imagine in the animation world, sets and props is a whole lot different than the regular film world where they're actually using physical objects. Is it mostly, drawing of sets and kind of creating sets?
Sure. Yeah, I think the more stylized they are, you kind of have to sort of follow some kind of stylistic issues there. But a lot of it to me sort of is, if you were doing something for a play or for a live action film, you still want to do a lot of research and have it connected to the story. So there's a lot of common ground, I think, between live action animation and the theater world. It's just a question of maybe how abstract or metaphorical it might be, or how rooted or grounded in something specific that's more real, perhaps.
Well, I'm sure things have changed a lot, too, since their first movie, which was Toy Story, right?
That they had done quite a few short films by then, but that was their first feature film, and pretty much the world's first animated, computer-animated feature.
I would imagine that things have changed a little bit since the early times with the film, but did they just kind of give you carte blanche, or did they give you very specific things that they told you to come up with?
Oh, well, when I was on Toy Story, I was working for an art director, and there's a script, and so you have very specifics. Like I worked on Andy's house and Sid's house, and I just and you would have, there might be a range of, like one kid's a good kid, one kid's a bad kid. We think they're living in this kind of a neighborhood. They live in a craftsman style house, or they live in some kind of Frankenstein remodel. So some of it you're bringing something to the table, and other things you're kind of going down specific routes or avenues that you've been directed to do.
You've been at Pixar now, what, 20 years?
25.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thanks.
Though I don't want to focus entirely on Pixar, I am a little bit curious about it, and there's certainly a tie to plein air painting. So tell us about what you're doing now versus what you were doing back then when you first started.
Well, I ended up in more of a senior design role, pretty much. I sort of went from set design to what's called production design. But I've done a variety of roles. I've worked in the theme parks doing design work for some of for Cars Land down in Los Angeles. And so I might, on some projects, I might just work doing lighting studies, which I paint digitally these days. And on some features, I've been the production designer, or I've split the credit with a cohort.
Well, Bill, when did plein air painting enter all of this?
It started, the initial sort of jolt was when I was on Toy Story. The art director of that film, Ralph Eggleston, had done what's called a color script, which was a sequence of images that represent the entire movie kind of in one sort of unbroken series of pictures he worked on it for a few months, and he had it pinned up, and it was pastel on black paper. And it kind of covers the moods of the different sequences of the film, as well as sort of the specifics of like time of day and interior, exterior. And it just had this flow of imagery that covered the whole movie. So it was the first time I'd ever seen a document like that. In fact, the fact that it was pastel wasn't even that intriguing as much as it was, oh, look that's the whole movie, and this is a couple of years before the film was released, and yet you could see sort of in color this kind of sequence, and you could sort of look at the dynamic range of color, how it behaved throughout the whole film. And so the whole idea of that thing just really struck me as something that would be a really good thing to do for myself, because I think I would know more when I was done than where I was at the time I first saw it. So I was inspired to do something like that on another film. So the next movie I got onto, A Bug's Life, that I ended up being the production designer for that film, which is pretty much like the senior art director. So of course I gave myself that role, and the pastels was just like, well, this looks like they're fast and they're kind of, you got premixed color and they're vibrant. So that was the only reason. I had used pastels in art school, but didn't get very far or have any reason to. It just seemed really messy, and you never had the right color. And so I started in trying to use pastels, and I really struggled with it. In fact, when I finally did a color script for A Bug's Life, I did it in materials I had better control of. I used gouache and acrylic because I had been using those as an illustrator for over 10 years. And but I wanted to do the pastels at that point, so I kept practicing. And I practiced at home on the weekends. I started practicing at lunchtime during work, and then on the way to work, I was commuting about 20 miles to get to the office, so I'd be driving around on the Berkeley Hills on the way to work, and I'd see these views, and so I started getting up earlier and painting outside. This went on for about 6 months, and I was getting results, and finally I just sort of started to realize that painting outside was offering me something I never could have gotten any other way. Just ideas about light, about atmosphere, sort of the nature of atmosphere, the change that's happening all the time, and that awareness of that change. So it slowly became this kind of an epiphany of sorts that it took a while to fully sink in, but I finally realized, like, God, nature is just full of this infinite, dynamic, changing, inspirational imagery, relationships of color, and, you're aware of the earth rotating because the shadows are all moving. As soon as you start to paint, the shadows seem to move faster. Things like that. And so it was kind of almost spiritual in an odd way, but also just inspiring for the movies. Suddenly I felt like I want to put that in the film. I'd see light on a specific hillside at a certain time of day, and I would, like, I could use that. And then also realizing that how your eye sees is different than how the camera sees. So, studying research, like, nature was like studying research. It was you could see color in the shadows and color in the lights at the same time. When the camera tends to blow out the lights or darken the shadows, you have trouble with maintaining that. Or your mind sort of cumulatively builds up a more cohesive image, I think, which is what the painter sees, I think.
Well, in the original animation, they were painting the cells and then photographing them, and I'm wondering if photographing them took some of the range out of the color. Is that correct?
I think what I'm talking about, the exposure range, is more that if you photograph a painting, you can probably get a pretty good exposure of it. But photographing nature, the range of light is far further apart. There's a much wider dynamic range in sunlight and shadow than there is in any painting on Earth. So anyone that painted something has already translated or compressed that level, that dynamic range, down to to reflected light as opposed to projected light. So I don't think there's really any big dichotomy between photographing old paintings or painting something digitally per se.
If I remember correctly, Bill, this whole plein air painting thing started having a world of influence around Pixar itself, because once you started painting, you started getting other people from Pixar to go out and paint. Is that right?
Yes, to some degree. I don't really take all the credit at all. I mean, I'd give Ralph credit for inspiring me, and then there was a guy named Dominique Louis who did large pastels, primarily, out of his head. But what he did that was interesting is he would look at photographic reference, but then translate all the color range that interested him in that image, and then paint something entirely different, but use the light from that reference but have a completely different, place in the world that color took place. And they both, I think, just showed you that, it could come out of your head, or that you had this kind of flexibility with how you translate color from one thing to the other. For me, nature became that seductive, kind of instructive, inspiring, seductive, that it felt good to be outside instead of looking at a computer, for one thing, but that there was this whole range of color that I was seeing in nature that I hadn't really seen otherwise or had thought about. So it made me want to go do it more. And then I did invite other people out to paint. I started teaching after A Bug's Life. I started teaching people that were lighting shots that had been using my pastels as sort of a lighting key. I took them outside to say, let's do it outside. If you're trying to solve lighting problems, you should try solving them in real time in nature without a computer. So it was just try to share it or get on the same page with how natural light could provide so much inspiration for the movies.
Bill, from what I understand, a lot of the studios have now started incorporating plein air painting. Some of the studios have brought in plein air instructors to teach their digital artists to work with them. Am I getting that right?
Well, there's some pretty, Mike Hernandez. I think he's got probably a group of people that he paints with, and I don't know. I think he's been down at DreamWorks. Another guy named Nathan Fowkes, who teaches down in LA, who's worked in the film studios. So it's not like I think there's just a lot of common ground between plein air and the film industry. Really, if you go back to the 30s and 40s, a lot of the Disney artists would go out and paint, or Emil Kosa, who is a California regionalist, worked in the effects department at one of the major film studios back in the 30s and 40s, I think. So I think there's people could get work in the film industry when they were visually inspired, and a lot of them did participate in plein air even before World War II.
So let's reverse this, though, for a second. So we've talked about how plein air has had an influence on animators and scene designers and so on. But what about the reverse of that? So we've seen these beautiful movies with this beautiful light and wonderful effects. What is it that we, as plein air painters, can learn from the animators, the things that you may understand that we may not understand?
It's a couple of ways to think about it. I mean, if you go to like theater or the ballet, you'll see, you might see great acting and storytelling and dancing, but you might also see really good lighting in a very much more abstract environment, something that's not natural per se. So there's a whole range of color that exists away from nature, yet in a lot of ways it's still subject to the same circumstances. We have atmosphere on Earth, and atmosphere, there's air that we breathe, but that also, disperses light in specific ways, and we have reflected light. And so a lot of the qualities of light that you can observe in nature, the same behavior happens if you're on Broadway watching a theatrical event or something like that. It's just that the colors often are saturated or in different keys than what natural light generally presents. If you go outside at night in a city and you look at all the neon and the street lights and everything, the color temperatures of these different light sources provide a lot of visual stimulation that you might not observe during during the day, for example, and things like that. So the range of color, is tremendous. And I'd say natural light doesn't always represent that. What it does represent is an infinite number of variations of what it can produce. But the possibilities of pushing color, belong to the night or to artificial light and things like that.
Well, why don't we transition over to your fine art work, because your work is just beautiful. Was there a point at which you just kind of said, I'm going to chase this, I'm going to go after doing paintings as, a little bit more than a hobby and getting out a little bit more?
Yeah, it was kind of a simple evolution. I'd been I was kind of just doing it on my own, and I was trying to drag some friends out from work. Let's go paint together, because it's more fun sometimes when you can do it with other people. And then I was reading Carlson's Guide to Landscape Painting, which I think was written in the 30s maybe. It's almost like you could open that book at any page and just start reading it, and pretty soon the sound of this old teacher voice, kind of a 19th century sounding form of writing or whatever, and telling you things, and yet I found it to be kind of insightful. And then especially when you combine reading something like that, you read a bit about his description of how atmosphere works and things, and then you go out and paint, and you'd sort of be hearing his words echoing in your head, but now you'd see nature doing kind of what he was describing, and so you feel like you're having a conversation with that guy. It's so much better to actually, if you're looking at art books, go do it. Like, look at the book, then go outside and try it. So you're not just trying to get it out of the book. You need to kind of see it. But that would accelerate my thinking, and you feel like you have kind of like this mentor coming out of the book, and so I was going along and doing that, and I think it might have been a friend of mine I'd known in art school said, like, oh, you should try to sell your work. And I went to one Plein Air event as just a spectator, and I met Randy Sexton there and talked to him a bit, and then I entered that event, I think, the following year.
Which event was that? Do you remember?
That was called A Scene on the Straight.
Ah, that was the first plein air event I ever attended, Scene on the Straight.
Yeah, it was, I don't know, 1999, maybe, something like that, 2000. It was pretty early. And then there was an Emeryville art show that Pixar moved to Emeryville in 2000, so we entered, several people were painting by then. So, like Sharon Callahan, who's a lighting DP here, we were painting together, and so we both entered work in that show. And then John Lasseter, who had been my director on some of these projects, he lived up in Sonoma, and one day he came to work and he says, hey, I want you to be in this art show that a friend of mine is putting together. So it turned out to be the first year of Sonoma Plein Air. So I took vacation days, to go up there and paint, and it kind of blew my mind. It was the first time I guess Scene on the Straight I'd already done, but Sonoma was when you're painting in real time. Scene on the Straight, you just showed up with your work basically, but this one was like, you were going out every day and painting, and it just seemed like this tremendous kick in the pants. And then at the end you see all this work by all these people, and you'd been running around that area trying to paint yourself, so to see what everyone else had done. And then you go to this show, and it was just like I met Kim Lortier, I'd already met Randy, I met Clark Mitchell, and just started those kinds of artistic communities, where you start meeting other painters whose work you like, and Kevin Corder, Greg LaRocque, great artists, really good folks. uh, and that just inspired me. Suddenly it's like, hey, my people. Except I kind of had to go back to work. It's like I started to puzzle, like, can you actually do this and make a living? It didn't seem at all obvious to me at that point. In fact, it's still not obvious to me.
So you're still working at Pixar every day. How do you find time to paint?
Yeah, it's I'm kind of seasonal in some ways. If it gets really cold, I'm not crazy about going outside to paint. Or if the days are short, I'm spending the middle of the day, or from like November to February, it's pretty hard to get out and paint unless you're painting on the weekend for me. But when the days get longer, you can get up early and paint before work, or you can sneak out a little early and paint after work. And so that I tend to paint more, when probably around March is a good time where you can start doing it. And I've already been painting at lunch a little bit, but it's pretty darn cold here right now, so it's not. I can probably, I'll email people at the company, hey, I'm going to go paint on, outside at lunch. I'll get like 2 people to show up,
I heard you had some snow in the hills there recently.
We probably did. I haven't seen it. Usually I'm driving the wrong direction to get the view, or the clouds are covering up the mountain that I would look at. So I would expect so. It's been cold enough, but I just haven't seen it.
So, we always talk about brush time and the need for brush time and paint mileage. You work as an illustrator in your job. Were you able to apply that to painting so that you were able to get up to speed faster, or did you have to just get out there and, like the rest of us, do a lot of brush time and a lot of mileage?
Most of my work, I'd say about half of my plein air stuff isn't really gallery ready. That's about the average. I think if I painted more, that average might go up, but I just kind of accept that not everything I do is actually going to be ready, or worth it, So a lot of times I think I'm just rehearsing. There's no question that the more you do it, in general, you're going to improve. I equate it to almost athletic fitness, but it's some kind of, eye, mind, brain, muscle awareness that you can refine, as well as just your sensibilities about things. So I'd say it's how you handle your materials and how relaxed or efficient you are with them, or expressive in a way that satisfies you, And I think if you don't paint for a while, you're just a little rusty and things look a little more you don't feel as good about them. So there's a variety of techniques. Like I said, I'm somewhat seasonal. Like I know if I've got a show coming or I've got teaching coming, a few months ahead of that, I just have to start getting in shape, literally. I have to make time on the weekend to paint, or go in the studio and work on something. There's a figure group at Pixar on Tuesday nights, so I'm starting to do that again right now. I'm doing a demo at the Plein Air Convention, so I got to be in shape. I got a show coming up in April, so I got to produce more work. So,
talk to me about the reason that figure work is important for plein air painters.
It'd be as if you could read music and play the piano well, you'd probably could handle a lot of other instruments effectively, to some degree, just because you sort of like the piano is sort of the foundation of Western music in some ways, I'd say drawing and painting from the figure is sort of the foundation of it's a lifetime's endeavor to kind of get proportions to go, to get them to work, or to, if you're exaggerating them, to get them to be appealing. And most of the problem solving that you find in plein air, it's even harder in the figure, because these are somewhat, biased generalizations, but you can move cliffs and trees and shrubs around, but if you start messing with the proportions of the figure, it's pretty obvious. People don't have necks that long, whereas you can do it in landscape because most people aren't they just don't think, oh, that rock should be over here. It's like you can put it. You're dealing with compositional issues, but most humans, have an innate experience with observing the figure, whether they're artists or not. They just know if it makes sense or not. And so the figure is a sort of a benchmark, I think, for the ability to draw well, for one thing. And most of it's because we're all sort of keyed on it. Everyone sees humans, so it's easy to judge whether it's working or not.
Getting into a figure group is really a great way to improve your drawing. I've noticed, I have a figure group that I do, and I've been in it, for 9 years, week after week after week, and it just makes a huge impact on your drawing over time.
Yeah, and it's, the weather's lousy, go to figure group. If you're lonely, go to figure group. It covers a lot of ground with regards to how do you sort of maintain a practice in bad weather, or, if you just don't want to sit in your house and paint by yourself,
So you do this annual trip. Something I've wanted to do is you go on this trip into the Sierras, that you do it every year. Talk to me about that trip and why you do it.
Well, it was I think I'd been, what was it? Well, I'd been reading John Muir, and then I looked at Edgar Payne's work, and even Clyde Aspenberg had a catalog that I got a hold of called Field Paintings that just had all these paintings of the High Lonesome, basically, his version of what Edgar Payne was looking at. And I just thought, man, I'd like to. The Sierras aren't so far, and when I was a kid, my folks had a cabin in the foothills. I always wanted to go up further, and we never did. So it seemed like, let's go painting. And Paul Crowder's wife, Tia, we've been working together for a couple of decades off and on, and he went from being an illustrator and a wildlife painter to starting Plein Air. When Tia and I went into the Sonoma show, he picked it up like the week after that, I think. Anyway, he'd been painting for a few years, and so he was interested in going up as well. And I was afraid of bears. I didn't want bears eating my stuff, and so I didn't want to do it by myself. I wanted to do it with other people, and so Paul was the first one on board. And then we invited some folks we had met at Sonoma, and got them to go, and some people from work, Ernesto Nemezio and Sharon Callahan, came on those early trips. And so it was just part of it was to have get other people to go with me, so I wasn't going to get eaten by the bear, and then do something like an art show, or be around other painters, but it wouldn't be as rigorous in terms of like you have to do this many paintings and you have to have them all framed, sort of the plein air event type of schedule, but without having to compile everything and have a big dinner, that whole just the rigor of it. You just go somewhere and paint for a week and not have all the pressures of having to produce for a show. So take the pressure off of that, but then just be out in nature, painting with other artists that you want to be around.
Well, I always looked at the work of Edgar Payne and the places like Temple Craig and some of the beautiful mountain lakes that I don't think you could just pull your car up. Don't you have to pack in?
Yeah. It turns out there's the Sierra Range is kind of divided up by pack stations into these different routes and passes and regions, and so there's usually a pack station that covers a few of the drainages. Most of them are on the east side of the Sierras, and you just called up a pack station, got a quote, and then I think they're used to people that ride horses and want to go fishing in lake after lake or something like that, or go from one point A to point B, which might be 30 miles and 3 or 4 days. And we just wanted to go to one place and have a cook. And at first they didn't even get it. Like, well, we can't do that. You don't want to fish? You don't want to ride the horse? What's the matter with you? It was a different kind of a model for what they commonly provided for people that wanted to go out into the backcountry. But they quickly adapted. At first the place that we use a lot, they told us, we just can't do the trip. And I was like, why? We just want to hire a cook, drop us off at the lake, come back and get us, And then suddenly they're like, yeah, we can do that. I'm not sure what the conundrum was for them, but it's worked out really well.
So do you ride horses in? Do you walk? Do you have like part walking, part horses? How does that all work?
Each person can either ride a horse or walk it. I mean, we go anywhere from maybe 3 to 9 miles in. Although where we're going this summer, I think we're going to Garnet this summer. It's probably about a 9-mile hike to get from the trailhead to where we camp on the lake. And there's an elevation gain.
But it's not 9 miles like straight up, is it? And doesn't the air get pretty thin up there?
Yeah, it's just really humbling, frankly. I pretty much live at sea level, and so I usually about a month before the trip, I just start after work. I'll just put on my backpack which is basically my art supplies, and I'll just hike up to this water tower and back, day after day, just to kind of get used to being on my feet that much. And you just don't have enough air up there if you're from sea level. So of course, if you're younger, you have boundless reserves of everything, and so the younger members of the group just are like jackrabbits, and the rest of us are just like these Volkswagens in first gear, even slower than a Volkswagen, I think. It's you just move slow, and you get used to the fact that you got to move slow.
So are you doing any teaching, or are you finding time to teach?
Yeah, I've boiled it down to 3 times a year. I teach 2 workshops in Point Reyes, one in the spring and one in the fall, out by the Chimney Rock area. We stay in an old Coast Guard lifeboat station that's got it's just an old wooden building with a big kitchen and bunks and stuff, and you can wander around outside and paint the cliffs, and it's just gorgeous out there. And then I teach up at a field campus, which is up in the Sierra Buttes region. It's kind of north of Lake Tahoe, about 30 miles on the west side of the Sierra Crest, probably around 7,000 feet. And that's like a 5-day workshop, and you got a dining hall and tent cabins, and it's run by San Francisco State. It's pretty pleasant up there.
For the people who are interested in studying with you, are you teaching basics or high-level skill sets? How would you define it?
I take everyone. I mean, there's people that they're just exhilarated. They want to paint. They want to try this stuff out, and I can't teach them to draw in the length of time of a workshop, so I don't claim to do that. What I really do is try to teach people how to see, and to get away from the idea of an object and start analyzing light and color. And you try to get them to change their way of thinking about what it is they're looking at, instead of, oh, look at the tree. It's kind of, do you compare one shape to another shape, or you're reducing this incredible shifting complex natural imagery into a series of colored shapes on a flat surface, and you're processing that in your mind. And so it's sort of showing them, like, here's how to break it down, and here's the qualities of light that I think are useful to consider, like how their behavior manifests itself in what you're looking at, and to go looking for those effects, and then to understand what do those effects mean in terms of value and color relationships. So it sounds like some highbrow intellectual baloney, but it's not. It's pretty simplistic in some ways. It's just getting people to sort of see the world that way, instead of naming everything and using, words like tree or house.
Well, here's a challenge. How do you teach something over a podcast? Is there something that you can share with people that might be helpful, that you can do verbally instead of visually?
I would suggest pick some place that you like to paint and go there at different times of day. And like go there in the morning, go there later in the day, or try different types of weather. So you either have overcast or sunlight, or there's a forest fire, there's a lot of haze, something, but a variety of, look at the same thing outdoors at different times of day, and then compare those results to kind of examine like what has changed and why has it changed. You start kind of, it's putting yourself into Monet's shoes when he was doing the haystacks and the cathedrals, and sort of documenting this change. And it's then it's starting to realize that that's an endless cycle of things that in one way repeats itself seasonally and daily, but also is never exactly the same either. So it's kind of that window into a certain type of like infinite, but just the complexity and the dynamic aspect of nature that sort of becomes part of the hook, I think, is to paint outside, is to sort of understand that. You can understand it as a painter, but also kind of as an inhabitant of the planet. Painting kind of will allow you to see that.
So what is your best advice for somebody who's new to plein air painting, just starting out, or, kind of new? Or, and also your best advice to somebody who's already kind of halfway there, or maybe pretty accomplished, but some things that they might be able to pick up from you.
Okay, for the starter, I would just say make a simple, like a simple kit of things, so you're not just hauling this massive burden of crap from the house. Like keep it simple. Like if you're going to do gouache or watercolor, pastels, I really don't care what the medium is, frankly, but don't overdo it. Just get simple tools and do it more than once, because it's not great every time. Like I tell you, half of my stuff isn't really working so well, so don't expect everything to work out. But if you do it, you maintain it like an exercise. Like if you were meditating, or you went to the gym, or you did Pilates, think of painting as sort of a recurring event in your life. Make time for it so that you have a chance to improve it, not just try it once. Oh, that's not for me. It's something you got to keep at. There's just no question about it. It doesn't matter whether you're just starting or not. You have to keep at it, even when you've been doing it a while.
You mentioned the Scene on the Straight. That was my first plein air event, and that's where I met Kevin Corder, first plein air painter I ever met. And his advice to me was go out and buy 100 8x10 panels or canvases and do 100 paintings. And don't even try to do anything else till you've done 100 paintings. What do you think about that?
That's fine. That kind of, I don't disagree with it at all. That's the keep at it thing, and they're not precious. If anyone who's gone to art school and went through figure drawing, when you first come back from figure class, it's like, hey, I did the drawing, and then about 3 months later, those first drawings look horrible. Because your critical thinking has gone up and your skills have gone up. So you got to work your way through that. And yet somehow we're good at deluding ourselves like, hey, this is great. And then a few weeks later, a few months later, no, those aren't looking so good. But we somehow have that energy to carry us forward, so that even when you're working through this stuff, you're going to improve, and you're improving. So that humans have a wonderful capacity to delude themselves, and in terms of art, that can be really healthy when you're starting, because you're euphoric, you're happy that you're doing art, It's only till later then you realize, hey, I got better. So these first ones aren't working so well anymore, But that's because your thinking has changed,
Well, I think people give up too early, and I think we have to kind of help everybody understand you can't give up too early. We have this thing in our society where we think it's that artists have natural born talent, but we don't think that necessarily about musicians or heart surgeons. And so I think we've just got to help people understand that it's a process. It's not going to happen overnight. You're going to have some frustrations.
It's exactly the same. Yeah, it's a hard work. You just got to put in the mileage, basically. And I really do believe you can teach anyone how to draw, whether, their sensibilities or their nature or their emotional state or their curiosity, or their patience. those are separate qualities that I think either work for you or against you in terms of going down the artistic road. But in terms of teaching people stuff, you can teach people how to draw. You know, it's not like it's just an automatic skill, or that some people are just born just so gifted. What they might be gifted with is obsession, you know, or that they weren't good at other things, so this path was more natural than other paths. You know, that I think that's not uncommon.
Or they just spend a lot of time drawing, you know, just constantly drawing and developing skills, and then everybody thinks it's natural talent.
I used to draw all over my school desk. I drew all over my homework when I was a kid, you know, and I finally started, like, okay, we're going to, you know, you got to redo your homework because you drew all over the margins. You know, then another teacher would be like, hey, you get an extra credit because you drew all over the margins, you know, so it seemed entirely biased whether you...
You could offer to sign those now. They'd probably be worth some money.
Oh, yeah, really. The ballpoint pen years, yeah.
Yeah, the blue period.
Exactly. Okay, I got advice for the people who've been doing it for a while. And this is, I'm dealing with this right now, is I'd say go in the studio and do something. I'm still sort of wrestling that part of it down. You know, you can do something in the studio that you can't do outside and vice versa, but I think you can take the inspiration from nature into the studio and do something magnificent that you really can't necessarily do outside. You know, people like Jim McVicker will prove me wrong, you know, because he'll go back to the same spot outside and keep going. And I tend to want to do it in one shot.
Well, I think you're kind of talking about what John Stern was talking about in one of his lectures at the Plein Air Convention, is that, you know, plein air does not have to be a means to an end. In other words, it does not have to be a finished product. You know, a lot of painters use plein air as a tool to bring nature, as you say, into the studio and then turn it into, you know, a big studio painting or something bigger. I mean, so it doesn't always have to be a means to an end.
Yes, exactly. It's a somewhat of, you know, maybe, for lack of a better word, a maturing of the whole thing. I tend to think of a good plein air painting is like a really good jazz solo. It's an on-the-spot, informed, improvised response to stimulus, you know, that's how I think it has a musical metaphor associated with it. Whereas something like a studio painting is deliberate, it's contemplative, it's all the things that you sort of can't do outside in a short period of time. You know, but so maybe you're lacking some of the stimulus, but you have a chance to refine something or to do something, you know, at a scale that allows the eye to wander deeper into an image and things like that.
Okay, so I guess your advice then is, if you're new, get outdoors. If you've been doing it a while, get indoors.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that doesn't mean, well, as you get older, you go in the studio and you never come back out. You know, I'm still going to the Sierras, but I just think that there's a balance there, that each one has something to offer, and that I think I really like being outside, partially because I think I spend my 9 to 5 inside staring at a computer most of the time.
So can you paint from a photograph, or do you find that you really have to have that study to be able to do a studio piece?
Oh, it's the photographs. I mean, I know how to deal with them now. I mean, first off, if I know I'm going to use a photograph, I'll take several. I'll expose one for the light and one for the shadow, and just sort of make sure I'm not locking out, you know, preventing information from being recorded by the camera. It's because we see better than the camera sees, in my opinion, most of the time. So if you're going to use it, just use the photographs intelligently. And, you know, what you get is shape information. I think most color information comes better from your eyes. And so if you can do field studies, you know, take a few photos, you probably got everything you need. So I will use photographs. You can, I mean, if people are, they just sort of use photographs and they didn't really study the thing or analyze it much, they'll probably tend to have their shadows will just be too dark. There'll be no information in the shadow. It's usually what happens if they make a normal exposure. Of course, it depends on the subject and the circumstance.
So you're going to be on stage at the Plein Air Convention. You're going to be on stage twice. You're going to be doing a session about animation and plein air, and then you're going to be doing a demo. Have any idea what you're going to do?
I think I was going to do sort of a plein air to studio thing, just since I won't be outside anyway. So I'm leaning towards that, but I might come up with a better idea. But that's what I'm going with right now. And
talk to me about the panel you're going to be on, panel of animators. You want to tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, I think we've got Mike Hernandez, who I believe is either at or has freelanced for DreamWorks, and then Sharon Callahan is one of my colleagues here at Pixar, and I'll be there. And then I think it's just to sort of look at sort of the phenomena of people in the film business, and I guess specifically animation in this case, that are continue to reference nature by painting outside and how that affects our work. And it should be interesting. It really did affect my work, actually, on Bug's Life and on Cars, and it sort of paralleled somewhat our tools developing, getting more complex color relationships that were available that I could demand. It's like I've been seeing them in nature, and I'm like, I want to have it do this quality. Then tools development sort of evolved along with, I think, our appetite for certain types of lighting effects that we were seeing in nature.
Well, I think one of the things I'm kind of hoping for is that I'm hearing more digital artists are coming to the convention this year, and I think a lot of digital artists who could be listening to this, who are exploring the idea of plein air, I mean, you should come to the convention because you're going to learn from the greats, the greatest of the greats. I mean, there's 88 faculty members, and what a great way to kind of bring the digital world together with the plein air world. It'd be kind of fun, don't you think?
Yeah, that'd be neat. In fact, some of the people that paint with me at work will use, they'll paint on their iPads. I forget what the name of the program is.
Procreate.
That they're using, but that's not going to go away. I think that eventually you're probably going to have some really good iPad painters at the Plein Air Convention, and they should be there eventually. It's another medium, and it requires literally. I mean, I guess they have the undo button, but it's really about the eye. And if you're dealing with comparative relationships and shapes and edges, and that stuff's been going on for centuries. It's just in a different medium. So it's mainly how analytical and visceral desire. Like I want to paint that, whatever that thing is, that behavior, that effect, that quality. It comes out. It'll come out in any medium if you can get your hands on it.
There's a group, I don't remember the name of them, but there's a group of people who basically are plein air painters who work off of their iPads, and we had some of them at the convention last year showed up, and people out there with their iPads. I think it's cool. I find the reflections a little bit of a problem for me if I'm outdoors, so I like to use paint when I'm outdoors, but if I'm bored and on an airplane, I'm painting on my iPad, which is really a wonderful thing, and you can get some pretty cool effects. Mm-hmm. Except, of course, on an airplane, you're painting the backs of people's heads.
Like paint a little picture out the window.
Yeah, little tiny windows.
You'll get good at your clouds.
Talk about the light moving fast.
Yeah, those are quickies.
Well, Bill, it's really been fun talking to you today. It sounds like you're a really happy guy. You've got a great gig where you get to do art, and you love painting and plein air painting, and sounds like you got kind of the best of both worlds. It's been really a pleasure to have you on the Plein Air Podcast today.
Well, thanks for inviting me, and I look forward to seeing you at the convention.
You have any final thoughts for anybody who might be listening?
See you at the convention. try to paint before you get there, warm up.
Thanks again to Bill Cohn for being on the Plein Air Podcast. It's going to be fun to see him demoing, and also, and by the way, he's a rock star painter, really great painter, and he's learned so much in his role at Pixar, but also learned so much from taking others out in plein air painting. And I think I need to acknowledge Bill, because he's really the one who started getting the Pixar artists going out at lunchtime and doing some plein air painting and getting them excited about plein air painting. And of course, this is kind of spread throughout the animation industry. I don't know if that was Bill. I'm sure there's others involved, but thanks to all of the people who have been promoting plein air painting within the digital arts industry. I think that's pretty cool. It's going to be fun to see these animators on stage talking about plein air painting and what it's done for them and so on. So anyway, are you ready for some marketing ideas?
This is the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhoads, author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Make More Money Selling Your Art, Proven Techniques to Turn Your Passion into Profit.
Well, in the Marketing Minute, I try to answer your marketing questions, and you can always email them to me, Eric, at pleinairmagazine.com. I got a couple of questions from a guy named Jason Bowman, who's in Ontario, Hamilton, Ontario, which is right outside of Toronto. And Jason happens to be a creative agency, an ad agency there. He's also a plein air painter. He's been in touch, and he sent me these questions. And so I got two questions from him. And he happens to be in the marketing business. He's an artist, and so he's probably not going to agree with everything I say, but we'll see. His first question is, in your estimation, what marketing functions are best outsourced versus doing it yourself? Well, in my life, I want to outsource everything somebody can do better so I don't have to burn time learning. I can't learn everything well. I can't do things as well as someone who's been an expert for 30 or 40 years or 10 years or 5 years. And so some things I try to set, what are the things I like to do? What are the things I'm good at? What are the things I'm not good at? I try to push all the things I don't like to do and push all the things I'm not good at off on somebody else. And so anytime I can get somebody who's better at it, I'll do that. But it depends. Like as an artist, there are things that when you're kind of getting started marketing your work, well, you're going to have to do them yourself because you don't have the extra money. And there are some services, and some of those services you almost have to use, right? Like there are services for building websites. You know, if you do it from scratch, it's probably a giant waste of time trying to figure it out, where you can get a company that you can just upload your images and everything's done for you. And there are people who do this, who specialize in websites for artists, for instance. And of course, there are others out there who do it for everybody. So you can kind of pick things like that. I know artists who actually outsource things like social media to experts because those experts are good at getting them massive followings, and it pays off in some ways. You know, maybe it helps them fill up their workshops or other things. There is some evidence that some people are starting to sell some art via social media, but most people aren't. And there's some very specific tricks. We're going to talk about some of those at the marketing sessions in the Plein Air Convention. But you know, there are lots of people who can do things for you. There are agents who can set up gallery relationships and manage them. There are people who can set up and manage your workshops or do your shows, etc. And it depends on how much time and money you have. We do this program called Art Marketing in a Box, which it's not an outsource, but it's like you pay us the money and it's a year of marketing that's planned out for you. It's all pre-written for you, pre-written newsletters, emails, mail campaigns, etc. And pretty much the people that we're hearing from that are using it are getting really great results. I saw something on the private website where we all communicate. One person said they had doubled their income last year. Another one said that they more than doubled their income. So those things are pretty cool. And they basically still have to be customized, right? You got to put your paintings and stuff in them. But they can save you a lot of time, but you got to have the money to buy them. And sometimes you don't. So there's this old adage, and that is that marketing either takes time or money. The more time you put in, the less money you have to spend. Of course, that time is keeping you from making money if making money is about painting and doing enough paintings. And you have to make that, you know, that balance thing. Can I spend a little money, get somebody to do something for me so that it doesn't take my time so I can do more painting? And so that's the way you want to look at it. When I started my business, I worked a full day, basically from about 7 o'clock in the morning till about 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon. And then I didn't have any time for marketing, so I had to learn marketing. So I would take from like 6 o'clock at night till 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night, and driving home at 11 or midnight every night. And I was working on marketing during those times, and I had no choice. So you got to put in the time or you got to put in the money if you want something to happen. And sometimes you have to put in both, especially when you're growing a business. But after I got some meat on my bones and I had a little money, then I would take that money and hire somebody to help me out or hire a freelancer. Today we have sites like Upwork where you can hire people for projects and design and writing copy and things like that. They're invaluable. Jason has another question. It says, best practices for designing an ad in Plein Air magazine. What to include, what not to include, what to emphasize, tagline, call to action. Well, when I did my first magazine ad, I knew nothing about it. I remember specifically the time I bought my very first magazine ad. I thought I was a hot shot. I thought it was really cool. And I went out and I called this magazine. I talked to the sales rep. She told me exactly what to do. But I decided I knew better. And so my friends had been giving me some advice, and I did exactly opposite what she told me to do. And the ad bombed. And then I kept doing it, and the ad bombed and kept bombing. And I wasted a lot of time and money. It was expensive. And so I think, first off, you want to listen to people who are experts, who do this, who know their publication. And I could have saved a lot of money and had a lot more success a lot faster. Let's start with some of the basics. In a magazine like Plein Air, you have basically one of two audiences. You have collectors who buy or who go around to the various Plein Air events, and you have artists who buy paintings, but they also go to workshops. And surprisingly, about 80% of the artists are buying paintings. And so even though you might think it's a magazine for artists, what we're finding is a lot of people who've gone to Plein Air events as collectors have taken up painting, and they're still buying paintings. As a matter of fact, what we've been learning is they're buying more because now they want to have them around them so they can look at them and understand how they did them. Everything you do, though, you want to start with the outcome in mind. So what do you want to accomplish? You may want to drive people to a show. You may want to drive people to an event, or you may want to do branding and build your name awareness or create any awareness of you. You may want to sell a specific painting, or maybe you want them to visit your website, or maybe you want to get their email address. You can't do it all in one ad, and when people try to, it just becomes one giant cluster mess, right? So honestly, try to figure out what's the one thing you want to do. What's the one purpose? And everybody's got a different purpose depending on what's important to you. And honestly, realistically, in most cases, one ad is never enough. It's pretty good for a show, like if you're doing a Plein Air event, you should really be doing 2 or 3 of those minimum so people get it on their calendar way in advance. But it's like a doctor asking you to take antibiotics and you say, well, I'm going to take one pill. There's a cumulative effect of that pill over and over time in your bloodstream. And the same thing happens with advertising. There's a cumulative effect. And that's why I always preach about repetition and never, ever giving up, because the more repetition, the more momentum you build. Momentum builds on momentum. And then after a year, 2 years, 3 years, you're just really rocking it and really getting results. And then what happens is people get cocky and confident and they stop. They think, okay, things are going well. And then their business crashes about 6 months later. And so then they kind of start up again and they've lost momentum. So keep that in mind. You want to be careful not to get seduced by numbers. Now, I can buy a magazine with 1 million readers. I could buy a magazine with 100,000 readers, or I could buy a magazine with 1,000 readers. The natural thing we default to when we don't know about these things is we think bigger is better. But what if the 100,000 people were people with no money, or people who didn't like paintings, or people who didn't like your kind of paintings, or people who maybe they like paintings, but they just, they're all in positions where they don't have the money to buy them? Or what if a magazine had 1,000 people, but every one of those 1,000 people were billionaires? It'd make a big difference. Like Fine Art Connoisseur, my other magazine, has, it's got a lot of readers, but it's got 310 billionaires. 310 billionaires. And I have one advertiser who tells me he gets $80,000 average return on his investment every time he runs an ad, because he's targeting billionaires who buy, $500,000 paintings. And so that's really good for him. So it kind of depends on the product. The reality is that most artists paint only like 50 to 100 paintings a year. And some of the better artists are only painting, 4 or 5 or 10 or maybe 20. But the reality is you don't need 100,000 people to buy paintings. You don't even need 1,000. You don't even need 500. If you've got an output of 50 to 100 paintings a year, you only need to sell to 50 or 100 people. So you want to do advertising in a place that's most likely to get people to buy who want something specific that you have to offer, where you really fit the target niche of the audience. That's why Plein Air Magazine is a great place if you're selling plein air or studio or landscape paintings, because it's really, really focused on that collector. And it's a good group of people, but it's a narrow niche. Now, when you're building an ad, start with the outcome in mind, like I said, and keep in mind that most art ads all look alike. And that's not good. You need to stand out. Ask yourself, how can I stand out? There's an ad running in Plein Air Magazine right now by Michelle Jung. She's running ads that brand her. They have a big photo of her, and it stands out. She doesn't show her artwork on the ad. And the temptation you would think would be, well, let's show the artwork, but everybody's showing their artwork, so she's going the opposite. She's standing out. And I think Charlie Hunter has been doing that a little bit too. And so the idea is you want to stand out. What can you do that's going to stand out? Experts will say the number one most important thing is the headline. It's like on an email, the number one most important thing is the subject line. You got to get them to read the subject line to get them to open the email. In an ad, you got to grab them fast with a headline because they're flipping through the pages, and that headline's got to grab them, talk to them, get their attention, make them want to read to the next line. And then the first line has got to draw them in. The photo has got to draw them in. Second most important thing is either the photo or the first line in your copy. And then your call to action. You want to have copy that draws them through, draws them to a conclusion, and then you want to ask people to buy something or to do something or to take action. Go to my website and do this. I'm a big fan of offering what I would call an ethical bribe, right? And that is, come to my website for a free note card or a free book or free something of value, so that they will want to give you their email address so that they'll sign up for something. And then you have a name and you can do more contacting with them over time. But don't do what everybody else does. Get attention, and attention-getting ad works 10 times faster than one that blends in and looks like everything else. And don't copy other people because you don't know the outcome you want. Remember, there was a time when everybody, after got milk, everybody was doing, got plumbing, got this or got that. Well, it isn't necessarily what the outcome that these copycats desire. Don't copy the big national advertisers. They're not necessarily looking to do anything other than keep their brand alive, and unless that's what you want to do. So be original, stand out, have a call to action, and that will work. I hope this helps. Anyway, that's the Marketing Minute. A couple of reminders for you. The Plein Air Convention is coming up in April in San Francisco. We're going to be doing that animators panel. That's going to be fun. We've got 88 instructors now, 88 faculty members there to work with you, including Joseph McGurl, who's doing a pre-convention workshop, Joseph Zabukvich, who's doing a pre-convention workshop. And we have this brand new reinvented basics workshop for people who are new to plein air painting. Maybe they're artists who have painted but not plein air painting. Maybe you're artists that just never painted at all. We had a lot of artists who showed up at the convention last year who had actually never painted before. They didn't have any materials or anything. They bought it all at the convention. But this year, we're taking you through some exercises to make this easier for you. We will be demoing in the basics course how to do oil painting, how to do pastel, how to do watercolor, how to do some other acrylic. And so you'll have an opportunity to see which medium is going to work best for you. And then if you're part of that group, there are mentors assigned to that group who are going to stick with you the whole week. And so when we're out painting every day, if you guys stick together with your group, then we have mentors who will be there working with you. Now we have mentors working with everybody across the whole convention, right? So we have field painters who are out there working with you when we're out painting. And this year we have an indoor arena as well, because we have people who don't want to go outdoors to paint, so we'll have mentors in there. And we also remind you that we have transportation, and you have to get that in advance, book that in advance, and pay for it in advance so that you're not doing it at the convention because we have to reserve the buses. We need to know how many we need, et cetera, okay? So anyway, also don't forget about the Plein Air Salon. It ends for the year any minute, so you got to get your entry in. This is your last chance for the year. Go to pleinairsalon.com enter as many paintings as you like. They don't have to be the new. They don't have to be fresh. They just have to be the ones that are going to win, right? And you could be the one on stage getting that big check. Also, if you've not seen my blog, I talk about life and art and other stuff on Sunday mornings. It's called Sunday Coffee, and you can find it at coffeewitheric.com. If you sign up, hit subscribe, then it'll just show up in your inbox on Sunday mornings. Well, this is fun. Lots to talk about. Let's do it again sometime, like next week. I'll see you then. My name is Eric Rhoads, and I'm the publisher and founder of Plein Air Magazine, and a passionate plein air enthusiast and painter. I've been painting a lot lately, so I'm pretty excited, trying to get tuned up for the convention, right? So I don't embarrass myself. Not that anybody would care. Anyway, remember, it's a big world out there. Go paint it. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
This has been the Plein Air Podcast with Plein Air Magazine's Eric Rhoads. You can help spread the word about plein air painting by sharing this podcast with your friends. And you can leave a review or subscribe on iTunes so it comes to you every week. And you can even reach Eric by email, eric@pleinairmagazine.com. Be sure to pick up our free ebook, 240 plein air painting tips by some of America's top painters. It's free at pleinairtips.com. Tune in next week for more great interviews. Thanks for listening.